Okay, everybody, thanks for joining us today. Really challenging times for colleges and universities, among a lot of other people out there, but certainly colleges and universities are facing some very unique circumstances right now and challenging times ahead. So without further delay, I'd like to introduce Steve Racing, President and CEO of ASMGI, and Frank Yako, CIO for ASMGI. So take it away, Steve.
Great. Thank you, Paul. Thank you to our attendees for sharing your precious time with us today. I know it's hard to break away for this type of activity, so I really appreciate it. Great topic today. Today we're gonna talk about how to develop and implement, actually, how to execute on that, but how to develop and implement a risk-based information security and cyber strategy for higher education. So I think it's a really relevant topic and something that's critically important to all of us. So I'm Steve Racing, President and CEO of ASMGI, as Paul mentioned. I'm joined today by Frank Yako, our CIO and Director of Strategic Initiatives. Thank you, Frank, for joining us today.
Oh, you're welcome, Steve. Thanks for having me.
So this I want to jump right in and keep things moving. Just a quick word on ASMGI. I did want to talk about, so really the focus of today's conversation is going to be about developing and implementing a cyber strategy, an information security strategy in higher education. And that's really, I think, what higher education primarily leverages ASMGI for is, our turnkey approach to doing just that, bundling the programs and the technology and the operation and things. So without further ado, let's talk about what our agenda for the day is. So we'll take a few minutes to paint the picture of the landscape in higher education and jump right in really to the strategy. The discussion topics are, focusing on how to develop the strategy and those types of things. And you'll notice that we bundle the strategy, the security strategy, and the assessment piece together. And you'll see that ASMGI's methodology is really about leveraging a gap-based, risk-based assessment as a basis for building a roadmap and a security strategy around. And then we're going to talk about some solutions that I think are relevant and meaningful, and wrap it up with some conclusions and closing remarks and those kind of things. So, Educause. So most of you are aware of Educause, an organization really geared towards higher education, obviously. Each year they publish a top 10 issues in IT that are meaningful, I'll say, relevant, most relevant for the higher education vertical. This list was published before COVID, before the coronavirus. It's worth noting, but I want to highlight a couple things. Number one issue on the Educause list is information security strategy, and that's what our topic is about. So the number one most important thing for IT and higher education today. Number two is privacy. Really, I think information security and privacy, we're going to bundle that together as we talk about it today. But clearly, universities draw students from all over the world and from every state, certainly in the U.S. and various different things. And each has its own set of privacy laws, and protecting that personal information is critically important. So, and number 8, higher education affordability. Obviously, never more meaningful probably than right now. But these are the 3 topics I think that we most closely align with this presentation. But I also want to mention, just by virtue of the way we do things at ASMGI, number 4, the digital integrations piece, creating an ecosystem and being able to deploy technologies that play well together, right? Making sure that data is available for use in other places, I think, is critical, both from a scalability standpoint, interoperability, and those kind of things. But simplification, administrative simplification, number 9, also something that's really a byproduct of the way we do things at ASMGI. So I think that'll come along with any of the solutions that we talk about. And certainly number 10, in the words of Educause, the integrative CIO, it's really about digital transformation in general and making IT more strategic within the organization. And this has been on a lot of people's roadmaps for a long time, proactive versus reactive IT, but and certainly now is no different, but more important than ever in my opinion. So those are the things. 6 out of the 10, I think, from the Educause top 10 IT issues are going to be covered today. So let's talk a little bit about coronavirus. How has that impacted your top 10 issues? Right, the top 10 list from Educause was published and really developed prior to the coronavirus. So it's impossible to not be thinking about this right now. But here's the current reality, right? This is a picture of an instructor teaching to an empty classroom. I mean, this is the reality of today. These things are actually happening. It's impossible to imagine that the coronavirus hasn't in some way had implications and a direct impact on your strategic objectives. An empty campus, I mean, this across the country, this is the norm, right? This is the scene that people are seeing. Students are now learning from home, so they're having to dial into online classes and learn from home. Certainly a reality. And this sign, all too common in universities across the country, right? All of those places that were public gatherings for student populations and student bodies to 24-hour study space at Stanford, right? Closed. They're all closed until further notice. So, and I think this really just sums it all up. It's an empty auditorium. That is the reality of today. So how have these things really had an impact on your strategy and your top 10 list? So developing an information security strategy together with data privacy and protection is, in my opinion, more critical now than ever. Has it really changed that from being a highest priority? Maybe there are things that have trumped it in the short term pardon the pun, but maybe there are things who have hopped ahead in priority in the short term in order to operate, but now is critically important to focus on cybersecurity and those kind of things. And so, as I think about that, work from home, remote learning, these are priorities that have taken precedent, from a criticality standpoint. They're absolutely necessary in order to operate, right? Educating our student bodies, a student-centric approach, all of those things, critically important, right? So, but how about securing the remote learning and the work from home situation, right? How about securing those technologies that had to be put in place in order to accomplish that? I think it's critically important and more important now than ever. Affordability, it's a heightened concern. Really, economic models across the globe, quite honestly, have been disrupted. But in higher education in the U.S., it's an incredible amount of change from an economic perspective, right? Where a revenue stream is going to come from, and those kind of things. Cost cutting has already been a priority, I think, of a lot of universities and higher education in general, but maybe more so now than ever, right? There's, in fact, definitely more so now than ever. So are you faced with, cutting costs even more now than before? I think, it was part of the strategy anyway to take budget out, do more for less budget, right? But I think now people are saying, look, you have to take cost out because we just don't have the operating capital that we used to have. Digital transformation, I think it's expedited. I think coronavirus, digital transformation is on everybody's mind and everybody's roadmap. But coronavirus has really expedited, particularly, the work from home and the remote learning in higher education. They are part of digital transformation, and I think they've been expedited as a result of this. So, did it all of a sudden become your number one priority? Those are the kind of things I think that we need to be thinking about as we look at cyber in general and how to accomplish these types of programs right out of the gate. Excuse me one second.
And one comment on that, I mean, it's extremely important to, as the priorities change with each institution, this just highlights how important it is for IT and security to be in lockstep with both each other as well as the requirements of the institution. So these all line up to that. There's significant investments that have to be made typically for accomplishing these types of activities, and it just becomes that much more important to know how those align and support the business initiatives of the institution themselves.
Excellent. Great point. So let's just jump right into some of our discussion topics. We're going to talk first about security strategy. And again, we're bundling assessments with that because it's part of our methodology, and I hope it all ties together for you when we talk about this. But here's the $1,000 question. Quite honestly, does your information security strategy lower your risk? Does it improve your security posture? And I really think we have to, not just loosely ask this question. I think we have to really think about it, right? Are we really doing the things that are improving our security posture and lowering our risk? So fundamentally, to me, here's the problem with strategy today. So I see this across the board in all verticals, and higher education is certainly no exception. But a lot of enterprises are implementing security tools and techniques based on frameworks, and it ends up being a very controls-based approach to cyber and security. And I'm not saying that frameworks are not important, because they are, right? We all have compliance requirements to meet. We all are trying to leverage best practices and do these things. And you pick a framework like NIST, or if it's a compliance requirement like PCI, and it says do this, and do this, right? And so the controls are important and the frameworks are important. But the problem is that we get tricked into thinking that we're good, right? That we're covered. And the reality is we're spending all this money on security, and yet the number of data breaches and the number of records that are exposed, right, are increasing. They're both increasing at a very rapid pace, an astounding pace, quite honestly. And yet we continue to do more and invest more money in meeting these types of requirements. So it's a fundamental problem, in my opinion. And why is it? Is because people deploy a control and they don't go back and validate that it's working. Not everybody, obviously, but some people, and a lot of people say, hey, we have a certification report that says we're ISO 27001 certified, right? So clearly we're doing the right things in security. But do you ever go back and validate that your controls are actually working to lower your risk and improve your security posture and those kind of things? Prioritization is a big challenge, I think, in most industries today. And the reason is we just, we have all of these drivers that say do this or do that, right? Zero-day attacks show up, the news media, pitches that somebody is, spreading malware that does this. And we are very reactive in how we approach security in general. And it's jumping from one thing to the next thing to the next thing. And prioritizing initiatives, I think, should be done based on the greatest risk to the organization. And again, I meet a lot of people that say, yeah, we do this, we have a risk-based approach, and we're prioritizing initiatives and all those things. And then, I see the portfolio of initiatives there going on that can't possibly be done in the amount of time that's allotted to do them, right? And it's get one done and move to the next one, get it done and move to the next one. And I think it's really driven by, item one on this list, putting tools and techniques in place that, that make you compliant. It's more of a check the box kind of approach to those things. The other thing is just being able to demonstrate to the business that you are achieving a return on the investment, and you are reducing the risk. It's important to be able to do those things. And I think without that piece, expecting a seat at the strategic table is certainly not going to happen. But I think we have to, in order to continue to gain funding for our initiatives and those kind of things, we need to be able to demonstrate how this is good for the organization. So here's the ONEteam strategic plan. So what if there was a way that you could get more from your existing security? So one of our mantras really at ASMGI is don't throw away the things that you've already invested on. Figure out how to better utilize them, increase adoption, and make them a core part of your program that actually accomplishes the things that you want it to, like lowering risk or improving your security posture. So minimizing security exposure is obviously a concern of everyone in the practice, but just really doing it, ensuring you're meeting compliance requirements. So again, the compliance requirements are important. In fact, they're critically important because you have to meet compliance requirements, right? But wouldn't it be neat to go into your audits confident that you know that your controls are working and that you're going to pass the audit and those kind of things? Wouldn't it be neat to be able to test your incident response plans and not just write a document and put it in a notebook and put it on the shelf or put it in a cloud-based folder or something like that? Actually testing the plans with simulated attacks. So wouldn't it be nice to be able to prioritize your initiatives based on actual risks? And again, these are all things that we think are definitely possible and should be part of your strategic planning process. Wouldn't it be nice if you could rationalize your cyber investment? So when you're talking to your board or your C-suite or your leadership, you're saying, hey, I need X number of dollars to do this initiative. Wouldn't it be nice if you could provide the business rationale to why that's critically important? And wouldn't it be nice if you could demonstrate the performance of that initiative? So I think all of these things are doable, and I'm hoping that we can demonstrate that in this presentation. But the reality of enterprise security, right? So here's the thing. Everybody gets so worked up about the zero-day attacks. 97% of breaches are at companies which already have the right controls in place, right? So these are companies that are saying we are ISO compliant, or we are NIST compliant, or we are PCI compliant. Data breaches are happening even though they have the right controls in place. 99% of attacks are known, and they have been known for years, right? There are automated scans that are looking for open RDP ports, and if you have one, they will find it, and they will exploit it, right? They're known. These are known breaches. These are known attack methodologies. They're known vulnerabilities, and these are the ones that people are exploiting. One thing, Frank, that I like to think about a lot, when being in the technology business, we can't just add a service to the portfolio and say, okay, we're good at it, right? We have to train, we have to become experts, and we have to do all these things. It's no different really in the dark world, right? It's a zero-day attack. People have to learn how to do it, right? You can't just know how to do it right out of the gate. This is why people like to leverage known attacks. I mean, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, those are, things that, again, as things are surfaced, the bad actors are leveraging technology to, basically exploit those types of things on a large scale, and they're as challenged to keep their money flow going by keeping ahead of the curve of either zero-day exploits or even exercising those skills with known exposures or risks so that they can exercise the ability to exploit those as they identify them. So they're challenged to go and use automation and to use the best technology that's out there so that they could literally leverage those types of capabilities to maintain their income and spend level as well.
Yep, roger that. And so the last metric, 95% of firewall breaches are due to misconfiguration. What this tells me is that people aren't looking for new and creative ways to exploit your firewall or your perimeter, right? They're doing the same things that they've always done, and they're hoping that somebody has misconfigured their devices and that the vulnerabilities exist, that they're able to exploit them. So it's interesting. So keeping with the topic number one, but moving into the assessments piece, I mean, this is a challenge that I see in higher education all the time. How many assessments do you have to perform per year in order to meet your compliance and privacy requirements? And again, I think this is the $1,000 question, right? Because there are a lot of compliance requirements that universities and institutes of higher education have to meet. Maybe they're PCI based, maybe they're HIPAA, FERPA for sure, right? GLBA for physical security, FISMA potentially, even FISMA. If you're doing research and you're getting grants from the federal government, by all means, you need to keep that information in a FISMA compliant, or store that information in a FISMA compliant way. Global and state privacy laws. So this is huge, right? There are, if anybody recruits students from Europe, they clearly have to meet the compliance requirements, from there, as well as the compliance requirements from the state, the GDPR requirements from Europe, but they also have to meet all the local state-driven mandated compliance requirements, right? So California, Colorado, New York, some of these things have been put on hold because they can't figure out how to do them. But the point is that it's not a one-size-fits-all, right? There are a lot of different people doing their own kind of things. There are a lot of frameworks that you can pick as a best practice track to head down, CIS or NIST or ISO or those kind of things. So what we advocate for is, rather than try to do an independent assessment to meet all of these requirements, what if you just mapped all the controls and turned it into one assessment that you could do every single year and meet all of the requirements that you need to, right? And so we call that a common controls framework. I don't think the concept is that new, but I also don't see a lot of people doing this, right? I see people doing an independent PCI assessment and doing an independent HIPAA assessment and doing an independent, this assessment or that assessment. And what I'm suggesting is that we have an opportunity, I think, to create some efficiencies across the board in the higher education space by mapping all the controls from a core set of compliance requirements and saying, here's an assessment that will help you meet all of those. It doesn't mean if you have a governing body, like if your volume-based PCI or credit card transactions put you into a tier that requires a governing body to come in and audit you, they're still going to have to do that. But you will already know, right? You will already have collected the evidence. You will already know that you meet it. So I think it's a meaningful way to really increase efficiency of that part of the process. How do you prioritize initiatives? So one of the things that I think is interesting on the horizon or the current landscape is the breach attack simulation. So if you think about it, I would think about it like this. So the old traditional methodology is a controls-based approach to security. So it's building strategies that say, if I want to align with this framework, or if I want to meet this compliance requirements, then I have to put these controls in place. And once I check those boxes, I can audit that the controls are there. I can audit that we do the things that we say we're going to do. But does the control actually work, right? Does it work? And so breach attack simulation takes a little bit of a different tack. It looks at common TTPs, or tactics, techniques, and procedures used by the bad guys, used by attackers, to get into your environment, and then exfiltrate data or do whatever harm or damage that they would do as it relates to that type of attacks. There are 13,000 plus TTPs, if you will, techniques embedded in this attack simulation platform that we align with SafeBreach, right? So if you could run all of them if you wanted to. You could run all of them against your environment and find out where your gaping holes are. You could run all of them against your PCI environment and find out where your PCI, holes are and those kind of things. But the point I'm trying to make is that what if we thought about this as a mechanism for prioritizing initiatives rather than checking the box, right? If we looked at it as a mechanism for prioritizing the initiatives that we do. So that said, let me just toggle back for a second and see if Frank, do you have any comments on the strategy and the assessment piece before we move into the solutions?
Yeah, they really tie together with the controls piece, because that really is when I call it a theoretical compliance item. I mean, you could check all the boxes like you mentioned and believe you have all the controls met, but until you actually put those into practice with something like a breach attack simulation, you could have your environment configured properly, meet all the controls that are identified in those frameworks, but the day after you do, let's say, an annual pen test, a configuration change might have been made to an environment, and then you've completely invalidated those compliance requirements or some of those controls. Something like this is a more contemporary way to ensure that with the types of things that occur and the changes that do occur under normal operating circumstances, that you are in fact meeting all those requirements. So it is a different mindset and way of accomplishing those requirements.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's one more way to make sure that you're blocking the attacks, right? It's one more way to do that.
Correct.
Let's talk about cyber solutions somewhat. As a second discussion topic, and so the $1,000 questions here are $1,000 question here is what problems are you trying to solve, right? I think it's paramount to really understand that in order to put the right solutions in place. And it's not a one size fits all, right? The answer to that really depends. But I just think about what problem is it that you're trying to solve? And so the reality of security today is that there's no shortage of problems to solve, right? And there's no shortage of solutions out there to solve them. In fact, the fog of Moors is the concept that was actually developed by the Council on Cybersecurity in 2014. It's been around for a while, but more, right? That's the concept. More knowledge, more tools, more advice, more requirements, more expertise required, more headcount required, more of all of these things, but not always more security, right? So people are putting a lot of tools in place and not necessarily lowering the risk and not necessarily improving their security posture, right? So I think it's a fundamental to think about. It's not just about putting more tools in place. It's about actually lowering your risk. So that said, how do you really, with all of these things out there that are available, how do you do it, right? How do you even know where to start? And at ASMGI, we do it by a holistic approach to cybersecurity. I think this is really the only approach to cybersecurity. Holistic, by definition, means the whole, right? So our approach to cyber is really that. It's holistic. It's looking at a total solution, and the way that we address that is with a service that we call ONEteam. But what it basically means is first build a program. That is the strategy of what you're trying to accomplish, what problem you're trying to solve, and what are the SLAs and metrics and various different pieces that come along with that, right? But the program should define what are the strategic objectives and, what do I even need the technology to do, right? What do I need the operations to do? The follow-on pieces or pillars of this should all be defined well in the program. It is the place to start. Because without the program, you're picking a tool without knowing exactly what you want it to accomplish, right? Without knowing what you want the outcome to be. But the second piece is clearly the technology. And we leverage, at ASMGI, we leverage a lot of, not a lot, but we leverage third-party technology platforms to do some of the heavy lifting and certainly the the routine things. But just the reality of today is that there is so much to do, right? There are so many logs to look at. There are so many of this. There are so many of that. There's so much data that it's impossible to do it without technology. It's a critical aspect of a total solution, but it is only one aspect, right? So I see a lot of people, and Frank, you can chime in on this. I see a lot of people that go and buy a piece of technology to solve a problem, right? One of the pillars.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and I know I don't want to preempt you with the operations component, but unless you're really looking at this from that holistic view, you're never realizing the full value of that investment. Going back to some of those statistics, you could have the greatest solution in the market, but if it's not configured properly, then you're open to those risks that it's intended to mitigate or resolve. And there's nothing worse than having the technology and not having realized its full value or have it configured properly or having the resources that understand how to maximize that investment. So there really is, you have to take each of those components into place or into account when you approach this type of challenge or requirements.
Yep, agreed. And I think, again, from a total solution standpoint, if you're missing any one of these elements, then your adoption is down. You risk not being able to demonstrate a return on the investment that you made, right? There are a lot of people spending money, for example, on technology that don't have a program in place and don't fully think through the operating model. And when I think about operations, I think about when I come to work tomorrow, this has to get done, right? So how is that going to happen? How is it going to get done tomorrow? How is it going to get done the next day? How is it going to get done the next day? And I think when you break the operating model, like we call it operationalizing the solution, right? But when you break that operating model into that level of detail or look at it from that perspective, it carries a different weight, right? But is clearly a core part of a total solution. So let's look at ASMGI's SOC as a service, and this we're going to go with the rest of the presentation is to really just look at how can we help the university, the higher education population, basically meet the demands of today and tomorrow from a cyber standpoint, right? And I think, SOC as a service, the MDR, the managed SOC, it's very popular today because of 24/7 eyes on glass and those kind of things. We'll talk through some of that, the value drivers for that. But at the end of the day, I think it really creates an environment for the limited resources that you have to focus on doing other things, right? These things, you probably can't hire enough people. Certainly, maybe some of the larger universities can, but certainly at some of the smaller ones, you can't, right? You can't hire enough people to do that. So there are a lot of things that are bundled into our security, our managed security services, and our SOC as a service. But MDR is one of them for sure, right? Managed detect and respond, and we'll talk a little bit more about the details of what that is. But I think what really differentiates this program from a lot of the other ones that you see on the market is the cyber incident response and forensics. They're all bundled in, right? So it isn't about playing the role of a SIM and ingesting all of your logs, being able to correlate events and do all those things, and then just whenever there's an alert, throwing it over the fence and saying, okay, you have a problem. Houston, you have a problem. Go check it out. This is about actually doing it for you, and solving those problems. And we'll put feet on the ground. We'll do remote or feet on the ground type of services. And again, we're going to get into some of the detail, but vulnerability management as a service included, custom reporting included, user behavior analytics. So again, this is another hot button today in cyber is being able to really establish what is normal behavior, what is abnormal behavior. If you start seeing some abnormal behavior, like an anomaly, throw up a flag, right? Here's an alert. Somebody take a look and figure out, why is Johnny downloading, all of the data from our, from our cloud storage? He doesn't normally do that, right? So those types of things we want to be looking at. What is abnormal behavior? And attack simulation as a service. Again, the nature of today's presentation isn't to talk specifically about this, but we could spend an entire presentation on just this topic. It's a great benefit, I think, from a lot of the reasons that we talked about before. It's included in this, and some of these things I have included and optional listed. And basically, what I mean by that is that a certain element of it is foundational and included in the service. And some of it is, some of the features are optional, and we can get into the weeds in that a little bit. Security awareness and phishing as a service. Humans will always be the weakest link in security. There's no question. Even where computers are involved, right? The good thing about computers is they only do what you tell them to do. The bad thing about computers is they only do what you tell them to do. A human is generally the weakest link. So security awareness as a service, and phishing as a service, as we know, phishing, email-borne attacks are a common attack vector. So that said, third-party risk as a service, and again, in higher ed, I think it's huge, making sure that you're evaluating the risk that is presented and introduced by all of your third parties. Virtual desktop infrastructure and desktop as a service, again, maybe more relevant to even now by virtue of the coronavirus than ever. But universities have, for several years, been trying to figure out how to do a lot of their things remotely. Again, heightened awareness and criticality around that right now, and some other services, depending on the outcome of your roadmap and things. So I'll break this comprehensive list into core services in this program and add-on services, right? So what we're going to talk about is the core. We're going to spend a little bit of time talking about the core services, and certainly all of the add-on services could be topics for their own webinar for sure, but all available. So Gartner has a maturity model. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, just one comment on the previous slide. If you look at that, again, those are things, especially under the core services that are, probably everyone's pretty familiar with, but, going back to our, references to the holistic approach and understanding all the requirements based on your threat profile, if you were to omit one of those potential bullets, then it almost negates, the benefit of the other components. That's why, we really emphasize having that full capability as part of the services that we recommend.
Yep. Excellent. Good point. I wanted to mention that Gartner's maturity model, modernizing your SOC, your Security Operations Center, and tooling it with the capabilities for doing analytics and various different things, and creating a model for achieving a level of maturity. So Gartner's already done this. And the point I want to make in this is that if you put our core services in place, if you put the core services of ONEteam in place, you will 0 to 60, get to 3.5 maturity level immediately, right? So we talk about shortening the time to value. Most enterprises, in my experience, some large enterprises that we work with have a fairly robust and mature cyber operations. A lot of smaller enterprises, mid-market companies on the smaller side of the enterprise scale don't, right? They just don't have a lot of these things put in place. So even if we said we can go from a 1 to a 3.5 by putting a program in place, it's a huge benefit and a huge value driver. And I just wanted to make that point that we can get you to here. So if you look at the Gartner's a pyramid of functionality, I guess, just having a SIM in place equates to a 1 to a 2 maturity, right? A lot of enterprises don't have a SIM in place, and they don't have a way to correlate events and activities and those kind of things. Threat intelligence, being able to incorporate threat intelligence into analysis of these, events is critical. Being able to do real-time network traffic analysis. When you see anomalies happening right now on your network, you have an opportunity to take action right now and not let bad things happen, right? So endpoint detection and response, EDR, again, another hot button in cyber. A lot of people are deploying EDR-type solutions at the endpoint and those kind of things. But they're still only getting you to a 2 or a 3, right? User and entity behavior analytics, security, orchestration, and automation and response. These are things that are at the top of the stack. These are the things that are getting companies to a 4 and a 5. And we're doing in this core service offering, we're doing a certain amount of those, but I would say probably not comparable to what, if you deployed a point solution in a strategic or a very large enterprise to do security automation or orchestration or those kind of things, or even user behavior analytics, it probably would be more robust than the types of things we're doing out of the gate with a core package. But we're doing some of those things already, right? We are doing UBA and we are doing security automation and those kind of things. So I'll get in the weeds a little bit on what exactly we are doing. But Frank, do you have any comments on this from a maturity standpoint?
Yeah, going back to my previous comment, I mean, it's a layered approach that, you have to have a solid foundation, beginning with the lower layers, and that's really the basis of how we define those core services that were depicted, on the previous slide. And the goal with all that is that as your business requirements change or your compliance requirements change, then we can continue to add on those add-on services, as well as to help you improve and increase your maturity level, from an overall perspective.
Yep. So I'm going to get in the weeds a little bit into some of the core components of this offering. So what are the keys to a successful MDR? First is 24/7 real-time threat detection. You need to have a true operating security operations center with eyes on glass 24/7 in order to be able to do a lot of these things. And it's real time. So if somebody sees lateral movement in your network, it's right now, right? So anyway, it's critical to have that component, that 24/7 operations. Otherwise, the bad guys, for example, they don't work business hours 9 to 5, right? They're probably waking up when you're going to bed. And if you don't have a 24/7 SOC, then they're going to know when is the best time of day to strike, right? Threat intelligence integration, again, I talked about this a little bit before, but being able to integrate intelligence from the from various different locations, but having ties into the underground and threat intelligence feeds and various different other things to understand, what is going on in the minds of the bad guys and what ways are they going to try to best attack your environment. Incident response, critical component. And again, this is, part of our managed SOC. It's a bit of a differentiator in a lot of response scenarios, I'll say, from a lot of MDR solutions, is that, just kind of where do you stop in that, work stream. And like ASMGI will actually include full-on incident response, including forensics and cyber investigative services into this program, so that's part of your core. So, and I'll go back to that that 3 pillars model where we talk about developing a program, and then a piece of technology, and then the operating model. It's one thing to have an operating model that includes incident response. It's another thing to have an incident response plan that appropriately says, here's what we do if this happens, right? And knowing who to call and and what to do and those kind of things. And the other thing I think is probably worth noting about incident response, this is one of the challenges, I think, in today's environment. 197 days. That's the average, the mean time to identify a breach of your network. 197 days. It's really it's amazing when you think about it that somebody can be on your network for that long undetected. But this is a common problem across all industries once again. So being able to detect early and respond appropriately is critical. And, you know, if you talk about integrating SOAR or some type of automation, orchestration and automation into your response, right? If you identify bad behavior going on in an endpoint, isolate it, get it off the network, stop the network traffic, do whatever. We're doing all those things in this program. So threat hunting, critically important. It's not enough to wait for something bad to happen and then say, hey, I have a SIM so I can correlate the events. We need to be looking for it, right? And we need to be hunting for it and those kind of things. And using advanced analytics techniques, again, there's just so much data. All of these systems are generating a tremendous amount of data. But if anybody has ever looked at Windows event logs, I mean, just one of them can generate 1,000 events in a fraction of a second, right? Just one system. Imagine all of these events being centralized in a log, and having to look at those manually is just you know, not possible. It's just not doable today. So here's our service. It's really MDR plus managed SOC plus managed security services. But I wanted to just go through a little bit about what happens at each piece of this functional piece, right? Functional layer, if you will. Remote and on-site as required. So security experts, forensics experts, and people staffing the SOC 24/7 available to help. Turnkey services for MDR, incident response, and managed risk. So 24/7 eyes on the glass, having an incident response plan, remote and on-site incident response, including forensics and investigative services, highly certified people in forensics available to be on site and do things like containment and do things like protection, right? Preservation of evidence and those kind of things. It's all critically important for outcomes to be what you want them to be, right? Particularly insurance cares, right? If you delete the evidence, then a lot of insurance companies are not going to pay, right? So custom reporting, managed SOC, those kind of things. You know, the custom reporting can be compliance reports or incident reports or alert reports. And the managed SOC is basically just that, having 24/7 eyes on glass. For ASMGI, it's in Cleveland, Ohio, in Provo, Utah, and in Canada. So all North American, for sure. Just the various different components of an MDR and an MSOC service, but being able to do network monitoring, right, traffic analysis and those kind of things. Looking at logs, so fulfilling the role of a SIM is critically important. Being able to have threat intelligence available from multiple sources. Cloud monitoring, not just monitoring on-premise infrastructure, but also in the cloud, endpoint visibility. First of all, what do I have, right? So building asset lists and those kind of things, doing an inventory and an asset list, and then also doing those detect and response type activities at the endpoint, and then again, aligning with compliance and audit support and those kind of things. So here's what it really looks like. From an architecture standpoint, all of these things. So we have physical sensors that sit in your environment, and we have agents that sit on your endpoints, and we have virtual sensors that sit in the cloud that are able to, via API, attach to most of your cloud services. And all of that data is fed back into our system. We gain threat intelligence from commercial fields and lookups and various different things. And then, create actionable results or outcomes via notifications, creating trouble tickets, things that we act on as SOC staff, as your partner, as your representative, providing trusted advice, again, from highly skilled experts, and being on site or remote to do forensics, whatever the case may be. So a lot of things going on in the architecture of this. A list of log sources, again, I'm not going to go through all these, but really any device that you use in the network, it doesn't matter what it is, if it creates a log in either a syslog format or an nxlog format, then we can ingest it. And that's pretty much every single device that exists. So, basically point your data source to our data collector, and we can collect the log files. That's basically what it boils down to. Monitoring cloud services, infrastructure as a service in Windows and in Amazon, SaaS applications. Again, a lot of the common SaaS applications are included via API, and then a lot of the different security services, being able to monitor those. Managed risk services, I talked about a little bit, but being able to do an inventory and an asset classification and identification of all the assets in your environment. I think this is huge. You can't protect it if you don't even know you have it, right? So being able to do that inventory and asset list, creating vulnerability-based risk assessments from on those assets, particularly, we have agents on some, so some of it's active and passive scanning and those kind of things, but risk profiling against the vulnerabilities that we find in your environment, being able to sit with you and actually evaluate your risk each month and watch the outcome, right? And being able to see your risk go down. Creating incidents, if there is ever an incident in your environment, being able to escalate that and having an incident response plan so that we can understand the escalation path and those kind of things. And, obviously configuring and monitoring and those kind of things. So the architecture for risk it's basically the same architecture. We have internal scanners that, look for vulnerabilities across your environment perpetually. We have agents on your system, so just like your current vulnerability scanners do. And then we can also use external scanners to look at various different sources like the dark web and things like that. Some standard reports. Again, I won't go through a bunch of this, but we have a whole bunch of reports that we can provide you on an ongoing basis just to keep you abreast of what's going on in your environment and those kind of things. And again, being able to demonstrate that your risk is coming down and that you're actually achieving return on those investments. Active Directory, again, I show this report just because we're going deep on a lot of these things, and this is a standard Active Directory report, so it shows you quite a few of those things. And lastly, I want to mention, SOAR and security automation and response in general. So, this is it's a pretty popular concept, and Gartner has, modeled what it takes to be SOAR compliant, and there are a lot of vendors who are talking about SOAR. But what's interesting to me is that, we meet the quadrants of SOAR with our core service offering. We're detecting incidents, we're triaging them through threat hunting, and obviously with human intervention, but we're doing a full investigation on that, on those incidents and events, and we'll remediate them. So we won't just throw it over the fence and tell you, hey, you have a problem, you should go fix it. We'll take action on those kind of things. And then we also, again, by virtue of, having agents and asset inventories and those kind of things, we can do a lot with vulnerabilities. But we also feed that into our attack simulation tool and engine, and we can incorporate that into this model so that we're able to help you prioritize your initiative. So by using this model, we're able to maximize efficiencies and economies of scale, but also achieve operational excellence and with built-in compliance. So we can help you align with any of the compliance requirements that you have today. I just wanted to kind of give you a snapshot. These are the kind of things that we can integrate from, we talked about some of the other services. Some of these things that you see on this screen are part of this core offering, but most of them are really add-ons. And what we do is when we build our portfolio of technology partners is really try to create an ecosystem. And what I mean by that are partners that play well together. So they generally have APIs available. They generally are able to either use the data created by another tool or share their data with another tool. So just a snapshot of that. And then on to conclusion. Frank, is there anything you want to share about, I went through that material kind of fast just because we're running out of time, but so let me just stop and pause for a second and see if there's anything that you'd like to reflect on from the last slides.
Yeah, going back to the previous slide with the ecosystem, one of the questions that we received from the audience is regarding existing tools and whether we can leverage those when looking at this overall approach. And the answer to that is, with the types of log sources or the integrations that exist between, some products and the type of solutions that we're talking about, in most cases, our goal is to maximize the investment that you might have already made, whether that's currently fully depreciated or you maybe still have a contract in place. So if we can meet the requirements that you have from a risk and a security perspective and leverage that investment, then in many cases we can do that. So just wanted to make a comment on that.
Yep, great point. And I actually, from a conclusion standpoint, that's bullet item number one, right? Let's not recreate the wheel. If you have already made an investment into tools and technology, let's leverage what you have. So, and I can tell you from my perspective, we generally don't care for the most part, right? If you're using Qualys for vulnerability scanning or Tenable, or Nessus or Rapid7, we'll build a program around the tools that you already have in place. And there may be some duplicative components, right? But again, I'll go back to validation. Like one of the things that we would talk to people about as part of their strategy is not just leveraging a single vulnerability perspective, right? Actually making that part redundant. So we're going to put an agent on their system. If we put an NDR, if we put our MDR and managed SOC solution in place, we're going to put an agent on your endpoints, right? So we can already do vulnerability scanning by virtue of having that there, right? It's already baked into the program. We're going to create visibility into what those vulnerabilities are. If you already have a tool, let's continue to use that and make sure that we're finding all of the vulnerabilities. In fact, a lot of times we even suggest adding another tool, right, for scanning. And we do this for other enterprise clients where they use a tool internally, and we do our own scans to basically validate what we're finding. So I think it's a critical point, but it's a great point that you make. If you already have tech in place, let's figure out how to leverage that, right? You've already made an investment. We may be able to take cost out of the equation by removing some technology that you already have in place. We may be able to leverage what you have to make it a more comprehensive program moving forward. But I think, one of the things that's different about our approach is that we want to leverage the things that you've already made an investment on and help you gain returns on those. And if we can, we will for sure. But it's either going to be a cost elimination or avoidance play for us, like get rid of we'll do this part for you. You don't need the tool anymore. Take that cost out. Or it's going to be, let's leverage the investment you already made. It's going to be one of those two things in general. So the other thing from a conclusion standpoint to mention is, mapping the controls to complete one assessment that meets all the requirements. I think this is huge for higher education, right? There's a lot of wasted time and energy being spent in trying to address compliance requirements for a broad range of things and doing, one assessment per year. In any event, that instead of 5 assessments per year or worse, not meeting your compliance requirements, right? If you can only do 1 assessment per year, you got to pick. You have to pick which one you're going to do. What if you just did them all every single year? I think it's a great value add. Prioritizing initiatives to improve your posture and lower risk, and demonstrate a return on your investment. I think this is a key part of the program as well. And then lastly, from a conclusion standpoint, there's strength in numbers. Let's do this together. And I think that's a critical part of our program in higher education is strength in numbers. The more people that leverage this program, the greater the economies of scale and the greater the benefit, I think. So key value delivered from this program, immediate results. So I mentioned this earlier, short time to value. We're going to get you to a 3.5 maturity level, 0 to 60 right now. And but it's not just that. We're going to do things for you that you probably are not positioned to do yourself without adding headcount or technical expertise and those kind of things. Rationalizing initiatives to lower your risk and improve security posture. It's I think strategies a lot of times miss the boat on this as far as lowering your risk and those kind of things. But we're not just going to do that. We're also going to give you a rationalized approach, and we're going to do all these things without the need to add headcount in that. And I'm looking at my clock, so I'm trying to try to go quick here. We're running over a little bit. If you can just bear with me. I want to communicate, like, how do we actually do this, right? And this is for you. And from my perspective, if I'm in the audience on a webinar, I want to know, like, how do I actually do what you just talked about? And I'm going to show you that right now. So our program, that we call ONEteam. How do we actually get started? We start with an assessment every single time. We map your controls. We run simulators against your controls. We're looking at, it's both gap-based and risk-based, but we're looking at your current state, like where are you right now, and where do you want to be, right? So this is the part about working together with you. We need to establish what is ideal for you. We can benchmark you against, higher education or those kind of things, but we need to establish a future state. And then here's your gap. That becomes what we do in phase 2 is put together a strategic plan or a roadmap. It can be for 2 or 3 years. In my opinion, it needs to be 2. It's going to change, though. I mean, you look at coronavirus today. I mean, nobody saw this coming, right? So everybody has to respond to it, and the plan has to change. But it's based on the outcomes from the assessment. We're going to build a plan that actually addresses those gaps that we identify as part of the assessment. And then lastly, we're going to put a program in place that's tailored specifically to you. It's a la carte components, right? So you may need a little more of this and a little less of that. And we're going to build all those things together and create a plan for you that addresses your specific needs. So it's a very structured approach, and I think it's it always starts with an assessment. I think those are the key points. So 204, Frank, we got it. We have a few questions. Do you want to go through a couple of these? Do you think we should just be respectful of time and wrap up here, or you want to get to a couple of questions?
Yeah, I think one that's really applicable is how long does it take to implement, go through the various phases and ultimately roll out the MDR MSOC solution. So I think that's definitely, if we could answer that would be great to have as a takeaway.
Yep, that's a great question. So three-phased approach, 1, 2, and 3, right? Phase 1 is the assessment, 2 to 4 weeks. That's a pretty normal deployment, and a lot of it really depends on the end user, right? There's some responsibilities to the client. So 2 to 4 weeks for phase 1, 2 to 4 weeks for phase 2, creating the actual plan and the roadmap. And this is basically taking the output from the assessment then and building it into a strategic plan. I would say 2 to 4 weeks there. Phase 3, putting the program in place and actually deploying it is 4 to 8 weeks, quite honestly, in order to do it. And again, it depends on which components. It's a la carte, right? So it depends a little bit on the complexity and the components. But I would say within 8 weeks, from start to finish, to do all 3 phases: phase 1, assessment; 2, this plan and the roadmap; and 3, putting the actual program in place. 8 weeks is a pretty, I'll say, is the minimum. 2 months, 2 to 4 months, I think most people are off and running.
Yeah, and we know that, with the coronavirus / COVID-19, that a lot of things have changed, and typically during the summer months prior to a fall semester. There's a lot of infrastructure projects that are done and work that's done within an environment. Something like this would fit really cleanly within the potential changes of priorities and being responsive to the changes in priorities that each of you might be dealing with. And so it's just something to think about, that if you're looking at your current budget and having to reprioritize things, this would be a way to focus some of those energies and to help to align to whatever that new operating model might be, come either the summer or the fall, as we look at what your overall program and business or educational requirements might be.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. 2:06. We should probably wrap it up. I have a couple more questions. We'll try to get those answered via email. I actually could keep going, Frank, if you want to just keep going, or do you think we should stop? It's 2:07.
We probably should wrap up, and we could include some of the questions in our follow-up, or the responses in our follow-up.
Great. Well, let's pause there. I want to thank everyone for attending today, and it's been a pleasure. And I hope this material helped you in some way. But please feel free to reach out if you have additional questions. Thank you, Frank, for your participation, and thanks everybody.
Well, thank you.